This guide is for Knights of the Fallen Empire, Chapter 2 in Master Mode. I'm using a Shadow Tank who is mostly in Tier 2 gear, but also has some Tier 3 gear. I was, however, able to do this chapter with very little problem in Tier 1 gear, which is what makes it better than Chapter 1, because as a tank, I had difficulties with the bosses in Chapter 1. So let's get started. We will have 3 boss fights and 2 automatic. Now this one right here is an automatic, and as you can see, I use my Force Cloak. There's a trick with it because the Force Cloak doesn't really work if you wait too long. I'm not sure why, but you tend to go into stealth and then out of stealth. So the trick on that one is as soon as the little icon turns red, use your Force Cloak to get out of it. They're not too bad to kill if it doesn't work. Valkorion, all through this chapter, Valkorion will be healing you, which makes the chapter doable, and it makes things a lot easier than Chapter 1, where you don't get heals in a lot of it. Now this is the first boss fight of the 3, and we have visions from the past. In this case, it's Lord Vivekar and the First Son. I'm going to pull Lord Vivekar over here because I want to be able to use some of my AoEs without waking up the First Son. The thing about Lord Vivekar is he has a Force Crush that he casts right away, and that can do a massive amount of damage, like 110k. I'm not sure exactly, it doesn't do it all the time, but I used my resilience to absorb it. If you don't have something similar to resilience, something that'll block force attacks, then I recommend you stun him and CC him, and you do not want that to get cast. Now the First Son here is pretty easy to kill. I just keep my kinetic ward up with him, and be warned, he has a small knockback, and you don't want to get knocked into the fire because the fire will damage you. Okay, and that's the first boss fight. We are right now in wild space, and on an asteroid it looks like, and we're going to be leaving that here shortly after this conversation. Now we'll be going to Coruscant, and the first fight you can stealth before you get into combat. But like right now, I can't move, I can't do anything, but as soon as these Republic soldiers turn red, I can go into stealth. Not exactly when they go red, just a fraction of a second afterward. But so I can just skip all these guys. The next fight will be against the Tel Shon up here in the Senate Plaza area. She hits really hard. If you're a DPS, I would recommend killing her fast and using your defensive cooldowns. As a tank, I can't kill her very fast, but I have more cooldowns, so I will be using those throughout the fight. Even though Valkorion's healing me, she can out damage him sometimes. He keeps me up to health most of the time, but I have to throw my my defensive cooldowns into the mix or I will die. This is actually the hardest fight for the Shadow Tank. Now I'm using deflection to reflect. I have the reflectability, and now spinning strikes, I'm going to interrupt that. I'm using deflection to reflect some of the damage back at her to increase my DPS. Now that's gone, so I'm using my Adrenal. And I'm going to do Force Speed, which gives me a little bit of Absorb, Spinning Strikes, Interrupt. I've tried not interrupting the Spinning Strikes, but it never really worked out for me. I found that it got pretty important to interrupt, so I would recommend interrupting it as quickly as you can. And boom, she's gone. And I was using different cooldowns all throughout that. Now I've got a bleeding dot right here. I have to let that expire before I run forward here. This is an automatic combat, which I will force cloak out of, but if I have the dot on me, I come out of stealth. So that's why I had to wait. So Tel Shon does a bleeding dot. So we're on Zyos now, and this will be the final boss. It's a big monolith. The fight mechanics are absurdly easy. And I will... The monolith does a terrible shout cast, which you have to avoid. While he's channeling it, you're okay, but when he finishes the channel, you will take a lot of damage and get a dot that does a lot of damage, and it can kill you pretty quickly. There are two ways to deal with this ability of his. The first is to interrupt it, and if the cooldown on your interrupt is too long and you can't interrupt it every time, you can simply run through him to the other side. He stays facing the same direction when he's casting it. And I'll show both examples. Okay, now during this fight I keep my kinetic ward up, and I use deflection on cooldown so that I'll increase my DPS with the reflection. But other than that, I don't need to use any of my defensive cooldowns. Okay, now watch what happens. He's gonna, here in a few seconds, he's gonna freeze. He's gonna stop moving. Okay, there he stopped moving. Now he's casting Terrible Shout. I interrupted it. And he's gonna cast it again here, but it interrupts on its own. I don't know if that's a bug or if Valkorion is doing anything, but I did not do anything to interrupt it the second time. There's my deflection. Okay, so I interrupted him. Okay. Now, if you don't have an interrupt available, you just run through. Okay? And then attack him from behind while he's doing his thing. So that was real easy. That's pretty much the mechanic. This fight, as a tank with weak DPS, this fight takes me about 3.5-4 minutes. I'm going to interrupt. Now, if you do the run-through thing, sometimes... Now, he interrupted himself there. If you do the run-through thing, sometimes he will do a knockback. And you need to get out and then start channeling something. You need to get out of that as fast as possible. And after that, he tends to get... the computer tends to get confused as to which way he's facing. He will actually be facing you, but it will show him facing away. And if he does a terrible shout and you don't interrupt it, but run underneath him, you'll actually be in the wrong spot. So just be aware of that. Since I've started doing the interrupt exclusively, I have not had that happen to me. But if you get the knockback, be aware that he may get a little confused as to where he's pointing. If he's doing the terrible shout and didn't start it pointing at you, he's pointing at you. Alright. The other thing, I'll use my deflection, get some DPS going. There we go, we interrupt him. So as you can see, this fight is very, very easy. It just takes a while if you're a tank like I am. And finally, the other thing is it's very easy to run out of force on this fight. As you can see, I'm a little low right now, and usually that happens when I use Shadow Strike too much. If I don't use Shadow Strike in my rotation, then I'm usually okay, or if I use it sparingly. But it is quite easy to run out of force in this fight. Okay, we're getting down to the end. And boom, he's dead. That is the final fight. The remainder of the chapter is conversations, and for that short chapter I got 3750 command XP.